Greetings and welcome back to the lesson. Today we continue with our studies on how to value companies for mergers and acquisition purposes. Today our focus is on the third model, which is the dividend growth model. The dividend growth model, we are analyzing methods or models that we can use to value target companies for mergers and acquisition purposes. And the dividend growth model, particularly the Gordon growth model, is a method used in mergers and acquisitions to value a company based on the present value of its expected future dividend payments. And this model operates on the principle that the company is the sum of all future dividends discounted back to their present value. And it's most applicable to companies that have a history of consistent dividend payouts. So the model is a simplified version of the dividend growth model that assumes dividends will grow at a constant rate indefinitely. Okay? And the formula for calculating the value of a share or a company is equal to V naught D1 V naught D1 over KE minus G, where V naught is the current value of a stock or a company, D1 is the expected dividend per share, KE is a cost of equity, which is the required rate of return by equity holders, and G is the constant growth rate. G is the constant growth rate of dividends. G is the constant growth rate of dividends. So this is the formula we use when valuing shares of a target company. So when do we use this method? When or where or when is it appropriate to use this method? How is it used? Now, number one is valuing stable, mature companies. If you are valuing a stable and mature companies, then the dividend growth model is most preferred. The dividend growth model is best suited for valuing mature companies with a track record of paying dividends and where dividend policy is a key part of shareholder return. And these are often in industries like utilities, consumer staples, real estate investment trusts, and so on. So the second scenario where this method is preferred in valuation of a target company is a minority stake valuation. Minority stake. What do I mean by minority stake valuation? Now, it's more commonly used to value minority stakes in companies where the investor's return is primarily from dividends rather than for a full acquisition. And in a full M&A deal, the buyer is acquiring the entire cash flow stream, not just dividends. It's important to know that. This method can also be used to cross-checking other methods. There are many methods of valuing firms for M&A purposes. So this method can be used as a supplementary valuation method to provide a sanity check on the valuations derived from other models like the discounted cash flow model or the PE ratio model. So how do we use this method? Let's answer the question. How? What is the procedure? What is the method? How do you practically value a firm using the dividend growth model? That is the next question. The first step is to estimate next period's dividend. Estimate next period's dividends. That is the expected dividend per share. Estimate the next period's dividends per share. That is to mean determine the expected dividend payment for the next period, and that might involve looking at the current dividend and applying the expected growth rate. That's the first step. The second step in this process is to determine the cost of equity. Determine the cost of equity. Number 2, determine the cost of equity. Determine the cost of equity, KE. This is the required rate of return for equity investors, and it can be calculated using models like the capital asset pricing model. The capital asset pricing model can be used to determine the cost of equity. That is step number 2. Step number 3 is to estimate the dividend growth rate. Estimate the dividend growth rate. Estimate the dividend growth rate. Estimate the dividend growth rate G. And this is assumed, is the assumed constant rate at which dividends are expected to grow indefinitely. And it should be a sustainable rate, and is typically less than the company's overall growth rate and the economy's growth rate. So after estimating the next dividends per share, the expected dividends per share, after determining the cost of equity and estimating the dividend growth rate, then we will have all the inputs in the formula. So the next obvious stage is to apply the formula. Step number 4, apply the formula. Apply the formula. Apply the formula. Plug the values into the formula to calculate the company's value. Plug in to this formula, then get the value. That's how you go about it. You understand, candidates? Yes, it's a very straightforward procedure. So what are the pros? What are the advantages of the dividend growth model? Now, the first advantage is simplicity. You can see, candidates, how simple it is. All right, the steps are just 4. So step number 1, the first advantage is simplicity. Simplicity, from the word simple. The model is relatively straightforward to calculate. Number 2, there is focus on dividends. Focus on dividends. How is it an advantage? Focus on dividends. It's conceptually intuitive for investors who prioritize dividend income. 3, this method is applicable to specific companies. It is applicable to specific companies, like the mature companies, useful for mature dividend-paying companies. Okay, stable and mature companies. That is the second advantage of the dividend growth model as a method of valuing companies for mergers and acquisition purposes. Mergers and acquisition purposes. Does this method have disadvantages or limitations? Cons. What are the disadvantages of this method? Number 1 is in relation to the constant growth assumption. Constant growth assumption. constant growth assumption. Constant growth assumption. How is it a disadvantage? Now, the assumption of a constant dividend growth rate is rarely realistic because most companies' growth rates fluctuate over time. It's not realistic to say that a company's growth rate will remain the same throughout its life. That is not realistic. The second limitation is it is inapplicable to non-dividend payers. Inapplicable to non-dividend. Inapplicable to non-dividend. It is, let me have it accurately. This method is inapplicable to non-dividend payers. Non-dividend payers. Those companies that don't pay dividends cannot use this method. Many companies, especially growth companies, the companies that are growing, do not pay dividends, which makes this model unusable. Then number three, the third limitation is sensitivity to inputs. Sensitivity to inputs. How is sensitivity to inputs a limitation? It is a limitation because the model is highly sensitive to the growth rate and the cost of equity. And small changes in these inputs can lead to significant changes in valuation. And if the growth rate approaches the cost of equity, the formula breaks down. If what? If the growth rate approaches the cost of equity. If the cost of equity is say 10%, and the growth rate moves towards 10%, then the formula will break down, because here you may have 0, d naught over 0, then the formula may not be useful at all. You understand? Yes, you understand. When I say, when the growth rate moves to 0, changes from g to 0, or when this ke moves towards 0, when these two are equal, when the growth rate changes, when the growth rate approaches cost of equity, the formula may not be applicable. Then number 4, we have limited relevance in full acquisition. Limited relevance in full acquisition. It has limited relevance in full acquisition. It has limited relevance in full acquisition. What does that mean? Now, in mergers and acquisitions, where the entire company is being acquired, the dividend growth model is less relevant because the acquirer is interested in the total cash flows, not just dividends. 5, it ignores capital gains. It doesn't account for potential capital gains from stock price appreciation. So these are some of the disadvantages of the dividend growth model. And that's all for today's lesson, where we have studied how to value the target company for mergers and acquisition purposes. In our subsequent lesson, we'll be looking at an illustrative example, a comprehensive example, and CASNEB examination past paper question. We'll have a look at how this can be applied illustratively. Thank you for choosing to study with us. We'll meet you in our next session, where we continue to share knowledge in financial management. Bye-bye.